Hello, this is Dalton Dodginghorse and welcome to the G4 Talks Health podcast. In this episode, we have Health Director Margo Dodginghorse and our guest Tsuut'ina Nation Associate Health Director Joel Fischer and myself as we discuss our findings in G4 Health's community engagement on climate change resiliency, where we engage with the youth, health technicians, social media, and elders on their different perspectives on the issue of climate change. They discuss the effect of preserving First Nations culture, how we think of climate change, ways we could plan for our future generations, and the challenges our communities face today when it comes to emergency management. We hope you enjoy and learn from today's discussion.
So my name is Joel Fischer. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm the Associate Health Director here at the Tsuut'ina Nation. I've been Associate Health Director for a couple of years, but I've been working with the Tsuut'ina Nation full-time for the last decade. And I actually had a couple of years, I got my foot in the door as a student nurse, working my summers out here. So I got connected with the home care department, and I was able to kind of come out, spend my summers getting to learn kind of more about the nation, starting to learn how to work with elders and gain some knowledge that I didn't initially have just coming out of school. So it was a really cool opportunity. And when I graduated, I got into a little bit of hospital nursing, but I also connected back to Tsuut'ina and started working in home care and just really kind of kept following the opportunities that I had here. So I had a couple of years where I was working, developing and running a program for families struggling with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And that one we did a lot of work with, it was very patient directed. So a lot of work around, education, housing, addiction supports, basic healthcare needs, advocating to different organizations and things like that. And then COVID happened. And so I found myself initially with the operations side. So I was in charge of all operations on the nation. So immunization clinics, setting up isolation trailers, doing contact tracing, all that stuff. And as time went on and we had, COVID was lasting a lot longer than most emergency settings for like emergency management systems would work. We lost a lot of folks from that, and I ended up in the director role there for a couple of years, just kind of in charge of everything that was going on and working really closely with leadership to help come up with policies and direction and just whatever we could to keep the nation safe. We were very focused on nation safety, and then everything going on outside the nation was secondary. It was important, it impacted the decisions we made, but nation safety came first. And then as we kind of moved out of COVID, I've now found myself in the Associate Health Director role. I work closely with Lacey Runner, who's the Director of Health and Mental Wellness on the nation. And I've been doing that since 2022 now, I guess. So yeah, it's been a really good opportunity, a lot of learning. I think, there's times that are incredibly rewarding. There's times that are incredibly humbling. But it's a career that I'm incredibly lucky to have and to be able to be, trusted on nation and get the opportunity to work with folks out here in a way that, people really have welcomed me in. So it's been great.
It's neat because we actually, pre-COVID, maybe just worked with Joel here and there. Yeah. And then with COVID, all of a sudden we were asked to do COVID response, and we're a tribal council, so we're not service delivery, and we're like, where do we start? And so Joel was really helpful with that. And then taking more of that leadership role in health. He's been involved in our Health Director Steering Committee work, which is a real collaboration of how do we advocate from a strength-based approach, and have always appreciated Joel's input and lucky to be part of our circle here and lucky to learn from him. And yeah, we have a good working relationship with Joel and Tsuut'ina Health.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I started during COVID 2020, so I remember I was making those videos with you around there. So yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, and I can't speak highly enough of the G4 team and the work that we've done together. I really think a lot of the work that we've been able to do at the health center has been largely due to efforts that we've been able to work collaboratively with the G4 team. We're really able to push forward things that we feel are necessary for the nation safety or for the health of not just nation citizens but Indigenous health as a whole. I think has really been a cool thing to be part of with your team, and I'm forever learning every time I get to work with you guys. So again, incredibly privileged to be able to do all of this work and work with the folks that I do.
Right on. Yeah. Well, same. Likewise. I learn a lot. I'm learning a lot from you. Like learning a lot from those health director meetings. It's just sitting there and just kind of absorbing everything. Yeah. It's been great. Yeah. It's been awesome for me because I just didn't really have a background in that at all, like before.
Yeah, I've been drinking from a firehouse ever since you started.
And it's like, oh my goodness. Yeah, it has. It's been crazy. It's been a lot of work, but it's good work.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people expect having a career in health, and maybe there might be that more of that clinical step in the door. That is what kind of introduces you to health, and then you realize, wow, there's a whole machine in the back that is bringing it to life, and advocacy, collaboration, all of those things, they really form a system. I guess I won't say a health system, but definitely some sort of system that influences health. Yeah. And it's been really neat to see, and I mentioned this in another episode, to see Dalton actually become a health professional, because with your background in media and video, I don't think this is something that maybe youth don't realize that they may have a career waiting for them. Yep. Yeah, and I encourage health as a career, but not looking at it for face value, because there's a lot more behind the scenes that is really exciting.
Yeah, like a lot of people, I think the youth could be told that they could go into health and that they have a spot there. Mm-hmm. That there's the need and like the capacity too, right? Like, building the capacity we have on the nation. That was like one of the topics that came up in these reports.
For sure.
Right? Was that we need more workers, we need more, people involved in that work.
Yeah. And like having nation citizens and folks that are actually able to address the challenges and really advocate for the needs of change from a firsthand experience, I think is way more impactful than the advocating that we may get from our frontline workers, right? Like folks will do what they can, but that firsthand experience and knowledge really makes a difference. And I think it's incredibly important to really see like the youth from the nation get interested and involved. Health can sometimes be a bit of a calling. I think you just you find yourself in it, and then it drags you along, and suddenly that's everything in your mind.
It's like 2 decades.
Yeah.
How did I end up here?
There's just so much that they can bring to the table to really address the needs that we have in health that I think don't otherwise get spoken to, and it's really cool to see. As we've got more youth from the nation who've been working in health, and more folks who are starting to get interested and kind of reach out. Maybe how do you get into nursing and stuff? I think is huge. So
that's really good. Yeah, I remember like the youth, when we engaged the youth sessions, they were like they wanted more opportunities to be heard, like the climate change.
Yeah, yeah. This was an interesting report because we were given which is pretty common in the work that we do. We're given 1, very limited funding to do it, and 2, very limited questions, I guess, to ask. But then the questions are like 5-part questions that they provided us, and we were thinking like, oh my goodness, like this is such a wonderful topic, but then what's going to happen with it? Like, so we wanted to. Joel was one of our participants because we met with youth and elders and health technicians and I believe leadership. We kind of went through a whole spectrum of participants, and there were some things that really stood out to me in this whole process, and some of the things the youth said and some of the things that our technicians said. And so what we thought is we didn't want a shelved report. So is there other ways that we can bring this to life? And with the revitalization of our podcast, we thought, how can we now bring our reports that would usually just be submitted and sit on a shelf to life, to bring the community in to kind of hear some of the things that we've been able to talk about or hear or learn. Kind of shifts your thinking to being less corporate and more human, and that's something that we've really been able to bring into our G4 Health program, is remaining human in this work. And it's tested. It's definitely tested. It's not, you have to have this really strong work-life balance, because like we said, health is not linear. Health is everything, and even our own health as technicians. There's been some of these reports that we may talk about in future episodes, like racism and discrimination, that were really difficult for us after. But even this climate change, when you start to hear sort of the opinions from the youth, experiences from our elders, you start to realize that it's kind of depressing at sometimes, like to see like, wow, we're so oblivious to the changes going on around us sometimes. And then when we take a minute to sit, it's like, oh, wow, it's definitely there. And when we're talking about who should we bring in to have this conversation, I mentioned to Dalton we should bring in Joel, because Joel, you said something in this engagement that stuck with me, and it was with climate change. And this isn't even called climate change. This process was called climate resiliency.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. But one of the things that Joel said was looking at ways to adapt, because we're kind of past prevention. And how do we look to ways to adapt? And I thought that was, it really sat with me. And I thought like, man, like that is true, because there's so many things that this climate change has forced us to adapt to that we don't even realize we're adapting to. Yeah.
The different age groups, like the youth, the techs, and then the elders, all looked at it completely different. Like the youth were like thinking about, it was like going to be be Mad Max in the future.
Yeah, I remember
the
that
water.
too. Yeah.
We're going to be like fighting over water.
Yeah.
They were really kind of imaginative of what it could be, because really that could happen.
Yeah.
And then the techs were thinking about it more, what can we do now to address this? And then the elders were like really shocked of how different things were. Like they were just like, it's completely different from when we were like little. And it's kind of shocking, like even spiritually, right? They were talking about
definitely.
like, they were looking at it in a much larger way, spiritually rather than just pragmatically. Yeah.
Well, we look at we started this conversation with emergency preparedness, and there's no emergency preparedness that's happening or that's resourced or provided to us to focus on this. But you look at, we were just having like a sidebar conversation about the weather, and like, how is it July and we've had like May weather, and it's like, and then I know like a few years back in September, like, I always think about this day because it's a personal day for me that I will always probably think about. But I remember it was September 28th. And I know the exact day because of personal reasons. And it was the hottest day. It was hot. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a July day. And, it was just, you look at that shift and you look at, we actually had a conversation, Dalton and I, with another individual within one of the governments about the wildfires. And we were trying to be forward thinking, and we were giving these ideas of like, well, how can we prepare for the wildfires, which ultimately is an effect of climate change. And, we gave them all these ideas and then nothing. And then no follow-up conversation. And sometimes like where we sit, it's like, we have the issues, and we also have to come up with the solutions, but we have nowhere to kind of plant those solutions.
And that's a pretty consistent problem, I think, that we have across departments with like Indigenous health, Indigenous wellness is, and even in like emergency situations where it's quite often that we find other areas will have first response, and then within our Indigenous communities, and when I was in the emergency management, there was an expectation if things happen that maybe 3 days after everyone else starts getting some supports, maybe something will trickle in and we'll start getting access to it. And it really leaves nations at kind of a deficit approach to things where we have to wait until things are breaking and then scramble to try and fix it. With the bare minimum supports that we sometimes get, which can be really challenging. And I think that this is where it's not overly surprising that we hear so much pessimism from the youth or even from our elders, right? Like there's not a lot of hope being provided right now, and we're seeing that in the climate anxiety, particularly in the youth, right? So this was climate resilience, and we talk about climate change. People can get touchy about global warming or our climate is changing. How you want to see that, whatever, it's up to you. But things are changing, and we're going to have to be able to deal with that, right? So we're seeing more frequent fires, like you were saying, Margo. We're seeing more and more events like these 100-year floods that seem to be showing up more often than 100 years. Maybe not specifically just in Calgary, but I mean, events like this across the province and across North America seem to be happening with more frequency and more severity. Especially the youth, right? Like that's, you get inundated by that on social media. You get inundated by that and it's not, here's some answers, here's ways that we can adjust, here's some hope that we can look to. It's just, look at this is on fire, that's underwater, we've got no hope, this is the end. And of course that's going to lead to a mental health crisis on top of everything that's going on, right? Like if I was 16 and that's all I'm being told is that my future is this burning like hexscape, I'm not going to be moving forward very optimistically in what I'm doing. And I think that probably is where I focus on, though, how do we adapt? Is because it's looking for what can we do, how can we provide hope, right? And there's lots of ways to adapt, and I don't say it in a way where I feel that it doesn't matter what we do to try and prevent climate change, right? Like you should still recycle. You should still, don't leave all the lights on. Don't go turn your car on and walk away for like a day. Don't burn styrofoam outside. Like, the basic be a good human stuff, because we're all in this big sandbox together and we have to take care of what we have together. But it's also recognizing that for our youth, or for even us on an individual level, the amount that we can do to actually elicit change is minimal, right? Like Canada as a whole contributes like, I don't even know of a full percentage to like total emissions for climate change.
For sure.
And stuff.
There's a lot to the whole world.
Because I'm boring. I like watching documentaries, and I was watching one, and I, for the life of me, I can't remember the title of it, but they were talking about like agriculture and how agriculture impacts, the environment. And you look at like where we live, Alberta beef, that's the grain, all these things are rooted in agriculture, which is rooted in economy and all of these things that we need to live, I guess. And there's this like press in this documentary I watched, are like really pushing people to become vegan, because if the whole world was vegan, then we wouldn't have this need for all this agriculture, right? But then you look at that strips us of our inherent rights. When you look at ceremonies and traditions, a lot of our ceremonies include parts of meat, and include parts of the world that we can't access anymore. Like even like some berries, like we're starting to see people, even our elders, start to change and adapt to like what's available to them now. And I remember we were preparing for a ceremony, and one of the elders said, okay, this is what I need you to get. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to tell us to get some, maybe some meats, whatever it may be, and to get some Saskatoons, and to get those things that we would normally get, if they were readily available. But it was really cool to see, because the elder adapted, and he said, bring blueberries and bring canned salmon. You remember that? Or canned tuna. And we were just like, oh, wow, this was, but did they adapt because they wanted to and it felt logical? Probably. But the reality is our source of healing and our medicines came from the land. And so when we look at how it's changed so much, we still need those things. We can't just encourage a belief system that has been here for time immemorial to say like, no, but don't eat meat because it's it's really bad for the environment.
Right? A lot of people don't think of the other implications, right? There's a lot of cultures that, that we relied on meat for forever, and we have a lot of things connected to that, right?
Yeah, for sure. But even like we were talking about, I forgot, we're talking about another thing about berries, and did you go berry picking? And I was like, I don't even know when to pick berries anymore, because like it's so different now. And I'll tell you a funny story. Me and my daughters, we went to IKEA, and when I'm Siksika, I grew up in Siksika, and my belief system is that. And so one of the berries that we loved growing up were called mitsunitsis. I don't know what kind of berries they are in English. I think they're bullberries. I can't even tell you, but they're little red, sweet and sour berries is how I'll explain them. Anyways, we went to IKEA and we're walking by these bushes, and I'm like, wow, those look like Mitsunetzis. And then so like I picked them from the back because they're probably sprayed. I'm surprised I'm still here to talk about it. But I picked them and we ate them. And I was like, oh my God, these are Mitsunetzis. And you look at this, we're like, we adapted, right? Yeah. We see like, oh my goodness, Mitsunetzis, which is a childhood treat for me, is now, you're making your building look beautiful. Curb appeal at IKEA, and it's decorated with Mitsunetzis. And when you think about that, right? So, when you look at our people who were colonized, imagine how the New World was so fascinating to them. And I picture me and my daughters outside of IKEA, like, what? No way are these Mitsunetzis? And so it was neat because like everything still is kind of there, but it's definitely not in its true form anymore.
It gets commodified, right? Yeah. And that's the risk and the challenge, I think, with seeing climate change and that resulting in changes to our environment that these things grow in, like the elders were speaking to, right? Changes in patterns of game, changes in where or how medicinal herbs or traditional berries and things like that grow. The real risk is losing those things or losing the cultural knowledge and traditional knowledge and aspects to that to utilize it, right? Businesses are bringing in these plants that can be utilized and maybe shared a little bit, but is it done where there's any explanation of what this plant is, maybe what the importance of this plant is, or is it just become commodified? And that, I think, is a concern, and my one big worry with the adaptation is everything costs. And so like if we need to adapt to stuff, is someone winning, or are we adapting in a way that's like just providing like safety and supports? Right? Like, so how are we changing how we build houses? How are we changing forest management in areas around the houses? How are we changing, I think those things are equally important. And then it's how do we ensure access and the accessibility and safety may be the wrong word, but like the continuation of access to all of these different, traditional knowledge keeping aspects that folks had. Like if everything is changing and we're losing all of that, it's not, like at the fault of the elders or the nation that knowledge is being lost. Our world is changing around us and we're losing this knowledge, and that should be a big concern to folks. And I mean, what we did see in the report that's like a very big concern. It's not necessarily a concern that I think is elevated past the elders or to our policymakers who can actually make some change, across the country.
Right. Yeah, that was a huge thing that came up, was like the access to land, like the traditional medicines and even just like mental health. Like going out in but then there's wildfire smoke and flood. And I was just thinking that even on the drive here, like the road was flooded, like literally on the drive to work today.
And we're so desensitized to it. Like we're so like meh, like okay. And we think about like I've seen like with like I've seen on like social media, right? Everybody wants to post their thoughts, and sometimes it's like, whoa, that's a dark thought, right? Where with all this rain, people will be like, oh, what if it floods again? And it's not even a big deal. Not thinking about like how many people were displaced due to floods, where we just talk about those things so casual, right? And when you think about we think about social determinants of health, we work in a world where health is health, and here's your health funding. We don't work in a system where it's set up to be inclusive and reflective of the social determinants of health, housing, infrastructure, all of those things that would support the health and well-being of a community. And that's a real challenge, because you look at this, I'd say it's systemically racist and systemically debilitating, or whatever we want to call it, because resources don't grow to support the adaptation required to actually meet the needs of change. Like even like our homes on reserve are not built the same as, where they have to go through every list and everything to make sure that this is safe for an individual to live in, where the homes on reserves are like, okay, here's your home, and how many issues are there? There's leaking, there's flooding, face value, my home looks beautiful, but my home has actually experienced 2 floods already in the basement, right? And it's like, oh my goodness, like how do we do this? Not having that knowledge or that awareness or that education to learn, okay, well, this the house needs a second sub pump, right? And how do people know that without actually having to experience it? And why do we have to experience to actually know the needs of a home?
Right.
And how do we start to implement community preparedness for what's to come? Because right now, I'm sure what we're seeing right now is going to be significantly different than what maybe the newborns are going to see in years.
Down the line. Yeah.
When you look at I'd say about 8 years ago is probably maybe like less than 10 for sure is when these fire seasons started to happen, where the whole city was taken over by smoke, and it's like, oh my goodness, like I never seen that growing up. That's stuff you see in movies, right?
The apocalyptic orange glow.
Absolutely.
This is wild. And then I think about like my little one, and I think this is a couple years ago. She's 8 now, and one of the things that she was saying, and we're coming into summer, and she's like, oh, I hope it's not a smoky summer. Like that's just, oh no, I'm excited for summer, but I'm not excited for the smoke, is what she said. And I think I brought that up when we're having these conversations, because I'm like, how is this? She was probably 6 then. I'm excited for summer, but I'm not excited for the smoke. The smoke is now a normal part of her summer experience, where for us right now, it's like, oh, this rain is not a normal part of our summer experience. Like, maybe a summer storm every now and then, but like today is July 22nd? And it's been raining for about 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, it is. It's like spring rain.
Yeah,
it's usually like plus 40 by now, and there's usually smoke everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I was just remembered when you were saying that quote I wanted to bring from the report. It was one of the elders said, climate change it's everything yet nothing. And I think they were trying to say that like it literally is everything, but right now it's so... I think no one's really doing anything about it, or everyone is. It's nothing, or we go through it like we're desensitized to it. Like I got to work, I just drove around I just took the long way around, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, then I just get on with my day. But I don't think about like, oh wait a sec, like it is everything, but we're not treating it like it's everything. We're treating it like it's nothing. And I feel like that was a common thing.
It's so nebulous almost that it means people don't even know where to look to start. Or it's so nebulous that you're able to kind of disprove or hand wave a lot of stuff that you see, right? Like, you can't just say it's everything, because different things impact things differently, right? Like fire may be started by lightning, the fire may be started by really dry conditions. There's so many different things that come together, and it very much where I think the elder is correct that it's everything, because all of these things added together are our environment. We live on this planet. That's all we got.
It is.
Everything there is our climate that we got to deal with. We're not going to Mars. There's no atmosphere there, right? Like this is what we got.
This is it.
Well, what COVID showed us is we will not get the first tickets to Mars, but we might get considered eventually.
Yeah, right? It's that too. I remember we in the conclusions we had pointed out that a lot of the struggles, same with COVID, that we face day to day, like First Nations, are just like amplified with like these emergencies.
Absolutely.
It's the same problems. It's just like turned up. It's not like those problems are fixed too when the emergency is done. It's like we still go back to our day-to-day lives, and we have to see people go through that. But for some reason it loses some funding, and it loses the attention of people.
Sure.
But it's still there, all the time.
And how can we encourage preparedness when we start to look at how prepared am I? If I'm advocating for preparedness, how prepared am I? And are my words just false words, right? When you think about do people living on reserve know you can get tenants insurance, to insure your belongings? Obviously you'll never replace, but we have, a lot of our, unfortunately, when there is fires in the community, it's a community responsibility. And how do we meet that need, but also how do we proactively encourage people to be able to say, for a minimal monthly fee, you could have some of your stuff insured, and that's something that maybe there's not an understanding that on reserve you can actually insure things, because it becomes really difficult. If I were to live across the road in an urban setting, and if I had to lease an apartment, I would be required to get tenants insurance.
Yeah.
I will not, be able to fulfill my lease if I do not get those and things. So, there's things that exist in, across the road, off reserve, that could exist on reserve, but I think we just don't know how to encourage it or don't know how to inform or whose responsibility is that. Is there, I don't know, like I don't work in other areas other than health, but is there ways to look at community insurance plans? I don't know, like is that a thing? Like, there's
the infrastructure.
Yeah.
That came up. And specifically the roads came up a lot.
Yeah.
Like I know in Bighorn, they have the bridge. Right, that was I think
it's like a one-way in,
one way in, and
then
they said the youth were saying that when that bridge gets anything happens to that bridge, they can't leave.
Yeah.
So
and if you've seen this bridge, like even on a good day, it's not a bridge that you want to you feel like, oh, this is the bridge. This is the bridge. I was
traffic,
expecting,
awesome.
I was expecting like a bridge, right? And it's a bridge. It's a good bridge. It gets you where. Very narrow. You can see that there's definitely improvements required, and even out here, like I think there's like this misunderstanding that Tsuut'ina has, because we're so close to the city, the issues are not there. But like there's been times like where my road gets pretty rough, and it's like this like 1 minute road from like the main road to my house, if that, and it can get pretty out of hand.
I mean, there is the overland flooding that we see, and I mean we're seeing with all this rain right now. And to the point you're making, like I think it's easy to think, oh, you road washed out a little, that's not a big deal. What happens when there's an elder or anyone else in the house who needs an ambulance, right? The choke point on the bridge. Well, if you got to evacuate in a hurry and there's a choke point, we've got a whole bunch of cars that are now stuck with people in it that could be a really significant risk if there's a fire, if there's like inclement weather. And then again, they have the same problem in the winter when you have these really extreme winter storms. And EMS can't even get into the community because if the shovel or the roads are not being supported by the province or by anyone else to get that shoveled out, then nations can just find themselves stuck and left on their own to solve this issue that any other community would probably have pretty immediate support on solving some of those problems, right? But this weird jurisdictional thing that sometimes happens almost exclusively to a negative for the nation. It's not often that the nation is winning out in whatever kind of outcome that is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we share that challenge of like Albertans, so First Nations are included in the Alberta numbers for them to receive funding. But then when it comes to us receiving services or any sort of reciprocity from utilizing our numbers, it's pretty sparse. It's definitely not there. But it's interesting because like in this report, the elders were talking about how life is speeding up for them at times. They talk about it's speeding up because the climate change is so unpredictable, and so like probably even like with this rain, like imagine how much anxieties are starting to be fueled with like elders and maybe even the medically fragile, like those who need services to be leaving their homes, and they did talk about that, and it was interesting. They were even talking about they don't know how to dress anymore. Like elders will leave the house all bundled up, and then it'll be like 35 degrees in the afternoon. And, if you live in this area, like you can have like a cold, hot, and humid day all in one day, right? It's so crazy. Like, but like I found like I really sympathize with the elders because they've had probably a more consistent view on life than we have had, with the environment, because they've experienced the glory years, right? Like the years where it wasn't so awful. And then I think in my generation, we seen some consistency, and then probably more into where I'm at now, probably my 30s, early 40s, that's where we start to really see these weather changes. And it's like, it's still shocking to me. It's still shocking to me. It does catch me off guard. Yeah.
And even I was born in 97, I'm still pretty young, but I definitely noticed the difference between like the early 2000s and now. It's huge. Even if it's like, it's still very obvious, like in my own lifetime, that it's speeding up.
Yeah. And it also has added to the problem that like social media exists. So we have immediate access to all of these things that maybe we'd have no idea was happening all of the time.
Constantly.
And while that can like maybe skew how we see things, like you get a bit of a confirmation bias by being able to look at these horrible events over and over and see, just point to it and this is happening.
Yeah.
I think it's equally important to be aware of the changes that are happening, and that these things are real events, because that's how we start to kind of pull ideas of how do we change, how do we adapt, how do we prepare for these things that we've seen happen somewhere else. Because if it can happen there, it can happen here. In our area, we're not going to get a hurricane or anything like that, but we can get tornadoes. That's happened before.
The warnings too. They were just like the other week. Literally last week. There was
a couple of them actually.
Stampede.
So it's not like it's something that can't happen. It's important to be aware of and kind of take note of how things are changing elsewhere. But I think that is, with all the other doom scrolling and everything, we're just inundated with so much negativity all the time. I really think that exacerbates the problem that folks are having, right? Like it's gonna feel like it's moving so much faster. And for some of our elders, if somebody maybe has some cognitive decline or any dementia or anything like that, I can only start to imagine how disorienting it could be if you're in the morning thinking it's July and it's going to be warm out, and now it's like we had potential snow in the mountains today. I don't know if it did or not, but that's kind of a wild thing to think that we're like potentially having in July.
In summer. It's pretty wild. Yeah, I know they did mention that they think some of the age-related illnesses are getting worse, like for them. Like asthma too.
That
definitely with the wildfire smoke.
The extreme heat would make that hard too.
Well, even like in like older age groups. Well, I would just say all age groups. Like even like everybody have developing symptoms of allergies, and people who've never had allergies are now having allergies. And what does that mean for our benefits? Or should there be expansion on other benefits because of these changing things that are happening, right? Even I find like it's so common for everybody to have like a little cough here and there, and it's like, oh my goodness, like is that normal now? Is that everybody just has a cough now and we don't say nothing?
We're like desensitized to it now. I know what you mean. I've totally noticed people like coughing more. And just I notice people are just a little different when the smoke comes up, more irritable, a little more tired, and that's me too. I just get a little different. I feel different.
But they even talk about like in the report about like how hotter it is these days, and they talk about like how they're starting to like dislike summer, which summer, like when you think about it historically, it's been a real important time for us because that's when like a lot of ceremonies come, like Sundance, like different things that summer brings was really celebratory. But now there's like this dread that is like, oh God, summer's coming, and like it's you can't really predict it, you can't really honor it the way we used to, and again that adapting to it, these things will still happen. But even like how hot it is, I think about that. Like they talk about how harmful the UV rays are, and people who wouldn't regularly burn are burning now. And I remember I came to the office a couple of weeks ago, and the one nice day we had this summer, I sat out in my backyard, and I got like the worst sunburn on my neck, and I was like, oh my God, like one day and I'm already like like covering up, like it was terrible, and I've never experienced that. And I think about the little ones who how is this going to affect them in the long run? How are we going to have more skin cancers? Are we going to have more respiratory illnesses? Like how is it going to start to impact the health of our populations as it continues to change?
Well, and what are even the escapes that we have in the summer from like the oppressive heat or those smoke days, right? Like it can get really tough because our houses are not built for heat, right? Like it gets real cold here. We're about trying to keep the heat in, and that's great for 6 to 8 months of the year. But when we hit summer and it's 35, 40 degrees out, all that heat just gets trapped in the house. And unless you have air conditioning, which is not wildly common, it can make the house stifling. Now if you've got a basement, that's great, that might help a little bit. But we need to kind of maybe start seeing how houses are even constructed. I know, back down in the States, the decks that go around the houses with the awnings that go out act as kind of a natural air conditioning. So it helps the breeze and it cools the air down a little bit. So we might actually have to start looking at how do you incorporate houses down south with our insulation in houses up north.
Southern architecture in the north.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. And you'd have to do that because we can't just electricity our way out of it necessarily either, right? Like the infrastructure on nation to make sure we have AC for every house, that might be pretty difficult. Like the cost of it would be high, ensuring you have the infrastructure to run all the power. And then, because the nation is more rural and other nations would have the same problem, you have a big storm roll through, it can knock all the power out.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the infrastructure set up, and what's really cool on Nation right now is there is some beginnings of like power sovereignty. So the use of the solar panel setups for some of the main buildings, right? Yeah. So we have a space that if you have solar power that's going to a community center, if there's a major emergency and you lose power, if those are still running, like let's say that it's not, a storm that's covered everything up or the smoke from the fire or whatever, but you lose power, you've got some spaces that may still have power that are on nation. So folks have somewhere to go. And that may not be the safest place to stay, but it's a starting point where we can then access and get more help out, right? So finding ways that there's some resiliency that nations can build and, have that sovereignty where we recognize we're not going to see the supports come from, the feds of the province right away. How do we try and extend what services we can provide and supports we can provide until we think help can get there. Right. And I think that's some of the really cool stuff we're starting to see, and I think directions that maybe we'd need more of. But again, all of that costs money. And so it's what grants are available, what partners are available to try and make these things work. And I think that's potentially the ongoing challenge a lot of folks have is it's finding where to get your foot in the door and finding these partners that actually want to support in a way that's feasible.
I remember you mentioned mutual aid systems, like modern treaties. Like, what if the nations could work together? That came up. It's like, what if you could build some sort of mutual aid where like nations could be work cooperatively, sharing resources. That was cool.
And I think we discussed in some of the directors' meetings kind of like more, again, nebulously, like what this could be a thing. And it comes down to just nations have different access to different items, supports, or like tools for dealing with different emergencies. So, there's these things called tiger dams that are big plastic inflatables they can use for flooding to direct water. Well, some nations have it, some nations don't. But let's say that there was a collective within Treaty 7 area or Treaty 678 area where if something happened, a phone call could be made to the director of emergency management from the different nations stating, this is going on here. We've got an emergency situation. State of local emergency has been called and we need access to X, Y, and Z. And the nations could, on a mutual aid kind of way, share these items with each other with the expectation like it's coming back afterwards. But there doesn't have to be fees associated if nations are willing to help on a one-on-one basis back and forth. And then if there's dollars that are required, then that mutual aid network could be utilized off nation for a fee, like we see happen with fire services and stuff. When they come onto nation, there's this fee for the supports, and that could be done to try and make sure that you're keeping equipment up to date and repaired. But for that actual emergency basis where it happens on nation, the nations could just come together and provide as much support as possible and pool resources when capable to provide those services that may be lacking otherwise.
That goes back to that old treaty concept, right? Like is why we entered into treaty was to end the fighting, right? And work together to just be healthy, right? Peace and friendship. And I think that is a really beautiful example of a decolonized approach of climate resiliency, right? And I think that would be would be really amazing to see. And I think a lot of the time we're really challenged with looking for funding, like where can we first purchase these before we're able to provide them. And I think grants can really come in handy, but they can also be very
restrictive.
Yeah, exactly. Time, like with the time restraints, they're not sustainable. We could get so many wonderful things going. Like, for example, this, like I did share, this report we were only funded for a report, and I think for our 4 nations, I want to say we were given $11,000, if that, to do this engagement. And it's like, okay, and it's such a big conversation. Yeah. Imagine if we were actually given follow-up funding to say, like, okay, well, we hear your concerns. What can you implement or pilot from what you heard? Like, can we do like a pilot in 1 or 2 communities to actually measure and then sustain? Yeah. And that's like how funding. It's so crazy. It doesn't work that way, and it's so like when we think about like how, I don't know, just how like
it fluctuates and it's not as reliable. It changes
exactly,
over the years.
And we lose that human approach to healthcare or human approach to adaptation, whatever it may be, and we forget that. Not everything is time limited. Not everything, is going to expire because my agreement says it expires on X day, right? It's these issues need time to resolve, and the flexibility needs to be given to be able to sustain some of these impactful things. One of the things we talked about earlier was about the knowledge and the awareness, and like a lot of our elders now have solar panels, but they don't realize they don't have batteries to power those solar panels. So we've had, I've had an elder reach out to me, and I think there was like a power outage out here a couple of years ago, and they had called me and they said, and I was real excited because I was finally going to use my solar panels, and I had no batteries for my solar panels. So that knowledge and that awareness wasn't there, like, we're going to build your house with these, but did you know you need these? And that's going to be up to you. And so there's probably a misunderstanding. You think, okay, the solar panel is the battery, is it not, right? But then there's so much infrastructure attached to it that people may not understand that they need to, they only took you so far. You got to take it over the finish line. And so like, how do you create these knowledge, information, whatever it may be, to actually have people ready to be able to step into this space?
Yeah, I know you could probably talk to this with the funding, how sometimes you get the funding for the initial start of a project, but then you never have funding to keep it going or maintain or operate. It's like this similar. So even with this climate change, like, I know it's also infrastructure, but with the climate change thing, I think we could totally have more conversations about this, because I felt like the people, like the youth too, they were kind of a little quiet, a little shy, because it's so new. It's like whoever's, it's so weird if somebody randomly comes up to you and it's like, we have this funding, here's this climate change thing. It's this is the first time you've seen it, when you're like a teenager and you have other stuff on your mind. It's just like, it's so out of context, so out of the blue, So I think like things could keep going. We could keep, because there's like a stigma almost. People feel uncomfortable because they haven't been talking about it so much,
Well, even like with the youth, like with our engagement, we really relied heavily on the youth. I think we had 4 sessions, and I think, we always hear that in the work that we do, the youth are the future. How do we empower the youth? And then to be able to sit with the youth and for them to kind of be more probably careful, like to be like, are you actually talking to me like because you want to hear me, or because you have a mandate to talk to me, or because it's a trending moment? And I started my career in youth work, and it's challenging to be a youth advocate because sometimes you get that that, oh wow, you're so smart, but it's like, no, you're so smart, and we need to be able to listen to the youth because they have they have like a different way of looking things, because maybe they're not as desensitized as we are, or we work in health, so it's like, okay, like, what are we not seeing here? And a lot of what we're not seeing is what they're experiencing. And so being able to sit and talk with them, and I know that when we were done, like some of those sessions, I was kind of like, I was driving home and I was like, oh my goodness, like how appreciative that population was for us just to sit and talk. I remember even some were like, can we get a picture? And we're like, I'm just like a technician who sits behind a desk, right? But that was really exciting. And then I found like you can see this little community that they have within themselves. Yeah. I think about this other group that we met with, and the youth, they would like, they would say like a point and they'd really all start laughing, but it'd be a really awesome point, and then they'd be like, yeah, me too, or me too. And they start to build off each other. But then in those groups, you can see the youth that will probably be in these seats in the future, because it's like, man, they have a voice, and they're like even that Mad Max comment, we could be awful adults and say like, well, that was silly, or be like, oh my God, that's so true. Like, when we look at that, like, fighting over water, like, we don't know what's going to come. Did we know we would be fighting to preserve our medicines? Did we know that we would be, have what we have now? Like, we didn't know that. And, they're starting to kind of see beyond, and and I start to think about that. We take water for granted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have people taking like half-hour showers, just to unwind, and it's like, where's that water coming from? Right. Sometimes I get these like debilitating thoughts. I'm like, okay, my water comes from a well. What if my well dries up? Yeah. Then what happens, right? And we don't think like that, but it is that doom scrolling. It is that doom thinking, but it's real thinking.
It's not unfounded, right?
Yeah.
No, there's and with the youth, we need to actually like validate their feelings, because they're not feeling them for no reason.
No.
Maybe depending on the person, you look at it and say like, well, it's devolving into Mad Max. No, that won't happen. But I think you make a good point saying like, there's a lot of stuff going on right now that I would not have called when I was younger. So we don't know. And just preparing is a good idea.
Yes.
But I think also very often for the youth, and what's so important about the work that you guys do in G4 and how often we actually reach out to the youth is most of these conversations, they are ignored. And in a lot of political conversations, like across the country, that the youth are ignored, which leads to them feeling disaffected and continue to feel hopeless, right? That's not going to help mental health at all if you feel like your opinions don't matter and you're ignored. And then, you see policy changes that also are negative or impact the youth in a way that is not positive, right? Healthcare cuts, education cuts, all of these things that, whatever, you got to make choices for economic reasons. I'm not the guy who makes policy calls. But if they are by and large seen by the youth as things that impact services that help them, how are we showing them that they matter, right? Like, you guys showed them they matter. Their opinion matters. We want them to be part of this, part of the solution, bring them in. As opposed to just like, do what we tell you to do and you get what you get. And then we're surprised that, when folks are coming out of school getting ready to vote, they don't feel connected to anybody. They don't know, what am I doing, right? And so how are we setting them up to even feel like when they get to the position that we're on now, that they can make change or that they can drive change? I feel that we do a disservice to them largely as a society. And it's really good to see the work that happens here in an opposite direction. I think that's why we get such good engagement and to your point, Margo, such important knowledge from them and insight.
And that's what was shared in here. Like, they talk about wanting to be part of the conversation. And I think that's like our approach when we go in, is we're not like teachers or acting scary or acting smarter than, we try to like take off our hats, and enter that space and know our group and be able to like say like, whatever you want to say, like, you're not going to offend us, we just want to listen. Some of us will like, talk with the youth to kind of make them more comfortable. And we also say, if you have nothing to say, that's fine too. Because there's this, there's sometimes this pressure on youth that you have all the answers, but maybe they do, and they just don't want to share it. Maybe they're still processing. Even our elders, like even our knowledge holders, maybe they're still processing these changes. And how do we meet people where they're at is kind of what our motto's been these days. It feels like it. But they did talk about really being part of the conversation. And I think being able to have this conversation today, this is not, Margo Dalton and Joel, just like our what we think and what we feel, this is actually really informed by the elders, by the youth, by our colleagues, by those that we met with through this process, and it's really interesting to hear it and to be able to go through it.
Yes.
We really talk about how do we do more of this, and that's the real challenge. Is we can only do with what we have, but is there an opportunity for us to, say like the youth want to be part of conversations? Do we just build that into everything? Whatever we're talking about, there's a youth component. And that was my real takeaway from this. And it really took me back to, I did mention I did youth work, and it took me back to when I was a youth, and I didn't want to talk about field trips. I didn't want to talk about, let's go to the water park. I wanted to actually talk about real issues, right? And that was something that I was given that opportunity very young, and it helped me form a voice because I had people in positions like ours who sat and listened to me and wanted to hear me and a collective other group of youth, our opinions on things and how would we adapt to that. And they're going to be in these seats one day, and how can we support them moving forward? And we're trying to learn everything we can. Like, we're building a library now on the history of Alberta, everything, and it's oh man,
bringing the context.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Really and how can we inform them? Did you know this, right? And
right.
Or support. One of the things that really stood out to me too in the report was we talk about greenhouses, but a lot of the time we focus on greenhouses for food. And in this report, they talked about building greenhouses to protect and continue to grow our traditional medicines.
Yeah, that was good.
Can we support youth in becoming horticulturalists, right? To be able to learn how to care for plants, and can that be something that we could build in our communities through grant funding or whatever it may be, that our greenhouses are not for food, they're for medicines. Because to find the medicines now, we went out, I think, and a lot of our medicines are in places that have been really compromised by history, or there's the bomb testing that took place out here, and just knowing that the history is that in this area, you kind of I felt uneasy going out there.
Yeah, because you never know. I mean, we have programs, right, that are to clean up the bombs, but supposedly they were supposed to be cleaned back when they left. The record shows that the government was supposed to have done that, but then we wouldn't have had a need for us to create our own department to go and clean it up if that was true.
So there's that uneasy feeling, even us being one with our own lands, right?
Reclaiming our land, and it's the thought of the youth feeling that they're not taken seriously.
And you think about that lack of community for even some of our elders. There's a lot of loneliness that exists. Some may have lost their partners or their family, or maybe are dealing with medical illnesses, whatever it may be, where if we had these traditional medicine greenhouses, they could go there and they can be part of it, and they can smell and feel and share stories of wow, this one here, this is how it's used in our ways, and to really use something like a new initiative or something, but actually build community around it. That would be really, really cool to see.
I like those suggestions that the youth had with the greenhouses, and they were thinking creatively.
That's brilliant.
And just they were just coming up with all these cool ideas. So I think I remember air conditioning was a problem too. They were saying some of the the infrastructure too. Now you could see the overcrowding. People don't really talk about that. Yes, the environment's changing, but also the overcrowding of Calgary right now is also an impact. That also impacts the climate. Is we're all kind of forced into a very small. Our urban indigenous. Some people who were saying that some of the sea trains, for example, don't have cooling, don't have air. So then, if you're in there, that increases the likelihood when somebody coughs. There you go. There's another pandemic. It's almost setting us up for other epidemics in the future if we continue to go status quo.
For sure, One, the housing crisis just adds to that, right? So now you have more people who are living rough on the street. They're far more vulnerable to changes in the climate, right? Be it extreme weather, be it the really hot heat. There is no safety from it, right? They are directly impacted by anything. So, we're able to step away from maybe the worst of it, get some protection. There's folks that just have nothing.
Yep.
And they're the ones that are ignored and left out in that, right? There's often seen as less than by other people in our society,
right.
and it's okay to ignore them. Yeah,
it's not cool.
Yeah, and you make another great point about potential for other pandemics, right? So forcing folks inside due to the weather it can lead to more isolation and loneliness, like we may see in our elders. But it also, like the winter, we have a higher likelihood of having increased pathogen transmission, and it's just because everyone's stuck inside beside each other, rebreathing the same air, right? But we also can see that permafrosts and things like that are thawing. There are things in organisms that are frozen in that permafrost that we don't know about, right? Now, do I think that something from like the dinosaur times will come back and be the next COVID? It's not likely, right? We are going to be evolved differently from whatever bugs are coming out of the ground, but there is potential for things to impact animals, right? And that could impact traditional hunting. There is the ability for that to potentially change from a zoonotic into the humans, and then we don't know how we're dealing with that, right? So that's a risk. But there's other things that thaw. I mean, Russia, a while back, there was a thawing and anthrax thawed out of the permafrost, and that caused a problem, right? So freaky. There's lots of little things that are all of these knock-on effects. And I think this goes, again, back to what the elder said, where climate is everything and nothing. It impacts everything we touch. But it's also so hard to pin down that, like, trying to make a change is almost watching it slip through your fingers as you try to do something.
Well, we sit in these meetings with, like, very high-profile people who can make change, and you can give them, like, 10 health concerns, but they're going to zone in on money-making concerns. Like I think we sat in one and we're talking about, like, the systemic racism, the lack of infrastructure, all of these things that happen in our nations. And then when you kind of like sum up the meeting, it was like, your lands are wonderful tourist lands. Right. And we're like, what? Yeah. Like, we've said so much more in this meeting for some of these people who sit in very privileged seats to just take away the, like, how can we make money from these lands? It's like, and you think, like, I think that was, I'm so glad you brought that up, Dalton, because that elder who had shared that climate change is everything and nothing is, like, it's so true, because we sit in tables where a lot of things are based on how do we save money or how can we make money? What are the priorities of the bigger picture, right?
And it is difficult when everything comes back to money, right? And what's particularly challenging is it can't not be about money, because we live in a capitalist system and stuff functions on dollars, right? Like, I'm not unaware of that, and I'm not naive to the fact that that's how things work. But to your point, looking at things like healthcare, well, as a whole, we've kind of agreed that maybe healthcare should not be making money. At bare minimum, it is a not-for-profit endeavor. In Canada, we have a one-payer health system where it's government-run. So, essentially not-for-profit at that point. Still looked at very frequently like, well, where's the money? You're losing all this money. There's a cost to everything we do. The more people that we bring into the province, the more people require health care. Canada is a largely rural space, which means our health services have to be very diffuse to be able to provide care to people in very rural settings and in a very large area. So all these things drive up costs. But, if we're looking towards, privatizing and financializing the industry, well, then for sure that's going to drive up costs, right? Like, you can't financialize an industry without the competition, and in the health, that's not what you get. We saw that with, like, Dynalife or whatever when the lab services were taken over and things fell apart. It gets difficult to advocate for how do we bring in those dollars or utilize them, especially when we're saying we want to do preventative work, because preventative work has a cost now. But that cost now is to prevent a bigger cost later. It's just really, really difficult, especially working with the government, to convince them of that, because everything is on 2 or 4 year loops, right? So no one's really looking to plan 10 years out. And so costs that happen now that will have supports and really have the return on investment in like a 5, 10, 15-year timeline aren't priorities, because you can't get reelected on 15 years down the road if you're paying for stuff now. People are self-interested and people live in the moment quite often. So, if you're trying to get elected, you're going to run off whatever is going to get you elected. But I think that really increases and prevents us from solving a lot of our issues on a long-term basis. Like planning is part of it.
When you think back like to our old belief systems, and when you look at like some of the teachings that we've received, we think about 7 generations, right? We don't think about like 7 days from now or 7 months from now. We were thinking 7 generations. And when I was like thinking, I was pondering about that one time, and I was thinking, and I was like doing like the math, and I realized like my son is a 7th generation from our ancestor who signed the treaty, and so when you think about that, we're living 7 generations from treaty right now. And we think about like, is this what they envisioned for my son or my daughter, or that generation? And we think like a lot of these things can be rooted in money, but a lot of them are really rooted in community and healing. Like we even heard throughout this of recommendations for people just to stop in and check on elders. That's something that like, am I, Margo, doing that enough in my own personal life? Am I stopping to say like, checking in on my elderly parents to say, are you guys okay? Do you need anything? Right? And I think we've really lost that sense of community, and that's free, but it's also a shift, right? How do we bring that back? And you are right, Joel, like there's so much of that right now thinking, but what about like, 10 years from now thinking? And we're lucky to have those conversations as our collective of health directors and technicians to be able to, we try to think outside those lines, but then we're also put in a system of like, but will our other colleagues, will our other, areas that we have to, kind of convince together be in on this same understanding. And I say we're very fortunate because there's 4 of us, with an extension of our other support team, that we come together pretty harmonious. We come together, we do differ, we do understand there are challenges, but we're actually a really unique group because and I share this a lot, is we agree more than we disagree. And if there isn't a disagreement, we validate it to be included in but also this is something we have to consider. So we try to, we agree to disagree, but we've built something really unique where we're able to look at all the different, environments that we're faced with, and we're able to find a common ground. And I think that's really what the elders and youth in this takeaway from this process was. They wanted us to find a common ground. Like, how do we bring the first thing is, let's just bring people in to talk. Let's inform decisions or the opportunities to make decisions by the community. And that's really important for us to do. And I think it's more easier said than done.
For sure.
Yeah. And I don't know. I don't have the answer. And I think we've been in business or whatever, our program has been implemented for over 8 years now, and I don't think we have the answer of how to make sure we have the communities represented, because there's the health centers, and that they're up and running, and they're hustle bustle, and your days are, no day is ever the same there, but that's not the full view of the community.
For sure.
That's those who need health services, where you have a population that may not need health services or may need health services but don't want to go, right? And so how do we be more inclusive of that population out there that's not attached to the health centers or to programs?
And I think it's, to your point, starting to look at how we address issues from less of a deficit lens and more of a strength lens, right? And so knowing that when we speak to folks who are either coming into the health center or, we are only going to be getting, acute issues or, maybe it's a chronic health issue, but it's more so the challenges that we're trying to deal and help with, as opposed to reaching out to, those who are doing well. We have plenty of healthy nation citizens that are doing really amazing things, that have, wonderful opinions that we can lean on and learn from. It's just recognizing that exists and actually trying to go out and get that, right? It's very, very easy, I think, for us to focus on the negatives or the challenge, because we're always trying to solve them.
Yeah.
But we have so many voices and so much knowledge that we can reach out to, because we can't have all the answers. And sometimes the smallest, softest voice carries the best solution.
For sure.
And finding that person can be tough, but we have to be open.
Definitely. Even this whole process, youth that I'm a hockey mom, right? So I've seen some of these youth, and I didn't even know they would think that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I was just like, wow, you're so smart. And then that's how we kind of close the sessions, thank you. This has been really a learning opportunity for us as well.
Yeah.
And I think that reaching people is one of the hardest things to do. Communication is one of the hardest things to do, because there's obviously a need and want for it, but nobody's figured out how to reach everyone. Yeah. But you look at social media, you look at things are being reached. I'm sure everybody can think about something trending on social media and relate, but if we're to think about but by the way, the weather is terrible and it's actually because of climate change, right? That's not something people are going to want to talk about.
Yeah.
Unless you build the space for them to want to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you both for inviting me and give me an opportunity to kind of say hello, introduce myself to the listeners and the work that we do. And then, this is just really important work that, G4 has been doing with the whole nation, and really starting to think about the future and how do we plan for the best future instead of deal with crisis as they show up, which seems to be an ongoing lifestyle though. Since COVID. So getting back to planning and looking forward, I think is really important, and it's just very cool to see, and I'm forever grateful and privileged to get to be part of such a forward thinking group, and really getting to try and do something positive with the work that I do, right? If I got to work for a living, I'd like to just be able to feel good about what I do. So, So thank you again, and this was great.
Oh, thanks for sharing.
I think what I would like to share with people is just reach out. Reach out, because like we talked about a lot in this episode, is the importance of listening and hearing, right? And being able to voice whatever opinion you may have. There are things, everything's taken with a grain of salt, but if we sit in silence too long, nothing is going to change. If we sit in silence too long, nothing is going to inform. Yeah. And so being able to reach out to us, I know this is only one way, but there's other ways to reach out. And we do consider everything. We try to consider things as best we can, and we value our community's voice more than anything, because that guides what we do. To be able to have informed processes or recommendations or decisions, that's priceless. We're not just giving an opinion because we worked in health for so long. We're actually have opinions that were formed because we listen to people, and I think that's really important. So reach out. Thank you, Joel, always. We can get into these conversations forever. Hopefully we can bring more to life this way. And Dalton, keep on encouraging us to voice and to share and guide us in a good way to communicate.
Right on.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Sweet. I just want to end it off with the 3 questions that we asked. Just for context. So the 3 questions that we had asked the youth, the elders, and the health directors and social media were based on your definition of health and well-being that resonates for the community representing. How is climate change impacting health and well-being? Second question, how is the health system as defined or understood by the community or communities you are representing vulnerable to climate change impacts? In other words, what are some of the gaps and challenges in the current healthcare system that make the health and well-being of people more vulnerable? Last question, what would make the health system for the community or communities you are representing more resilient? So what priority actions are needed in the short to medium term? Example, within the next 10 years. So if you're listening to this, there's some questions to think about for yourself.
And we simplified them.
And we simplified them.
We'll give you the simplified version.
I was like running out of breath there. I was like, we simplified them to just how is climate change impacting your health and well-being? How is the health system vulnerable to climate change impacts? And how would you make the health system more resilient to climate change? So, siyas Gus and naniyas tani.
Thank you all for listening to today's episode of G4 Talks Health. You can visit our website, www.g4health.org, or follow us on Facebook at G4Health or Instagram at G4_Health. Naniyas tani.